we go.
Hey guys, this is Chris with Half Chrome, and this guy.
What's up, guys? I'm Jack.
So today we are going to be talking about the Mavic Air. It's only one day in advance of the release, but we got some interesting ideas about it that no one else has really noticed, we think. So we're going to talk about some of those details.
Yeah, so you're probably wondering, well, why do you guys have a Spark when you're talking about the Mavic? Well, honestly, I think it's a lot closer to what this Spark is than what the actual Mavic Pro is right now.
At least that was certainly our first impression. We're going to find out some interesting details, though, as we continue on that make it seem like maybe there's a little bit more to the Mavic Air than meets the eye. So,
yeah. So tell us, Chris, tell us about your first impressions of this new Mavic Air.
So this is probably the most famous image. We cleaned it up a little bit that's been leaked. So some interesting things about it is what looks to be a 1 or 2 axis gimbal. So a lot of people are calling that a 3-axis gimbal. I don't think so.
Yeah, it's very similar to the one we have on the Spark here. This is a 2-axis gimbal.
The other thing you see is a pretty big lens, and that's kind of confirms some other ideas we have as well. And when I look at this view, I see a drone that doesn't look that cool from this angle, really. It looks kind of like a Spark. Wasn't quite what we were hoping for, really. But then we dug in a little bit more, and we see some interesting things. Clearly, in the top view here, much cooler looking drone. Probably the best looking drone we've seen from DJI, other than maybe if you like the style of the Phantom 4 Pro. You see the folding arms. Clearly this drone has folding arms. Adventure unfolds, that's pretty obvious. But one thing that is cool about it is they fold up very cleanly and easily, unlike the Mavic with the flipping arms and the folding props. What about those props?
Yeah, speaking of things that fold, the props do not, right? If we look at the next image here where it's folded up, you'll see the props are still stationary, right? They don't fold up. Why? Well, they don't need to. It's you know, the way that this drone is now, you fold it up, those props kind of fit nicely into the body. You don't have to worry about things flopping around like you do with the Mavic. And it's actually going to slide nice and easily into your bag. That may not sound like a big deal, but you know, that's a time saver actually.
So what's really cool is it looks like these features, these kind of stylized features on top of the drone, will actually help align those props. So not only will it be easier to fold the arms in, but the props are going to basically self-align. It's kind of like how when we put the Spark into its battery charger now, that aligns really nicely as well. So I think they're kind of just trying to make this much more convenient to fly than the Mavic. Even when you get the Mavic folded up, the props are flapping around everywhere. It's kind of a pain to deal with, so this is going to be pretty nice. About that style, reminded us a lot of this guy, Iron Man. You know, take a look for yourself. Look at the pictures on our site. You know, tell us what you think. Looks a lot like he's kind of inspired by Iron Man to us.
Perhaps. So, Chris, what do you think is makes this Mavic Air special? Like, so far I haven't heard anything super awesome. It kind of sounds like a Spark that folds up.
Yeah, so like I said, what looks to be a 2-axis, maybe even a 1-axis gimbal, not very exciting for us. I was pretty depressed when I saw that. Then I started thinking a little bit more and looking at this data sheet from the box, or at least the box specs that are listed and translated into English for us here. So what's kind of interesting we got the 32 megapixel camera. That's really the most interesting thing. Now,
yeah. I thought first, you know, that's just, you know, panoramic view, stitching a bunch of things together. We'll call it 32 megapixels. But Chris seems to think there's something different going on there, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you would never see on the Spark, for example, it can do these 360-degree or 180 at least hemispherical images that are 21 pictures stitched together. You never see them put on the box. Oh, it has a 180-degree camera, or it can do 40 megapixel stitched images. I just don't think that would ever show up on the box. So what we have here is actually a 32 megapixel sensor in the camera, and you could do a lot with that. You know,
like what?
Well, I mean, so why doesn't the Phantom 4 Pro have 32 megapixels, or your iPhone? Well, the main reason you're going to want that many pixels is you're going to be doing some kind of cropping, usually. So let's take a look. One of the reasons you're going to be doing some cropping. You got the Adventure Unfolds Twitter thing going on right now, where they're having you post pictures and then a cropped version of that picture.
Yeah.
So they seem to be prepping people for some digital cropping. You know, kind of an odd thing for DJI to do, but we think it tells us something about what you do with those 32 pixels.
That makes sense. Are there any drones that use this technology, or why would you want that, or how does that help? Why does that make this a good idea?
So, you know, the most well-known drone for doing a ton of cropping and stabilization is going to be the Bebop, Parrot Bebop. That has a complete hemispherical field of view, so it's actually bigger than 180. It's 180 corner to corner, but also width and height of the image. So a full hemisphere, and then they grotesquely crop that down to a much smaller field of view. So they have just 14 megapixels for that full hemisphere, and then they crop that down, I think, into 720 HD. Which is still, it's going to involve a lot of interpolation of the pixels. It doesn't really produce a very good result with that much image distortion correction and that much cropping. But at least it tells you what can be done. If you've ever seen, I mean, what can the Bebop do in terms of that?
I've seen people take the Bebop and you can actually roll it all the way over, and that image will stay stable because of the electronic image stabilization. So that's kind of a neat thing. So we're talking, we've got an actual mechanical gimbal going, you know, paired with an electronic stabilization. That's pretty neat. You know, okay, so Bebop does that. DJI has never done that before, have they?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Spark right here, for example, it does not have a yaw gimbal at all. They're doing totally electronic image stabilization in yaw, and it works really well. I've actually seen some artifacts of that, doing some flights into the sun. You'll see some of the solar glare, some of the stray light. You'll actually see that stray light artifact kind of twitching around as the gimbal's moving, but you will not see the image twitching around. So that image stabilization doing a good job of keeping the image stable, although you do sometimes get some artifacts. We've also seen,
exist.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen DJI also in a more recent announcement as well with this guy here too.
The Tello.
The Tello. So
that's right.
If you saw our other video, we took a Tello and we built one ourselves because we couldn't get our hands on one. This is our backup model. This one doesn't have the same quality of paint job or the motors anymore. We destroyed the first one, which is a lot of fun.
You'll want to see that video if you haven't already.
But yeah, so this guy, 5 megapixels, totally standout drone in that regard for how small this drone is. And we expect to learn more about that tomorrow as well. And but they say it's going to have electronic image stabilization, and I actually wouldn't be surprised if it has a wider field of view for flying FPV, and actually it crops down to those 5 megapixels and stabilizes those. You can get a lot more stabilization. Also, when you're flying FPV, it's going to probably be wide enough that you can see the props, but you're not going to want that for your nice stabilized
So it crops
footage.
it out.
So we hadn't talked about that before, but I wouldn't be surprised if they throw that in there. So anyway, what are we going to do with these 32 megapixels? Lots of opportunity to do some stabilization. Let me open this back up here. Got our iPad went to sleep. So one thing you can do is some extra roll stabilization here. So I measured how much the gimbal can tilt on the Spark, and I think I'm being pretty generous giving it a mark of 25 degrees.
I agree.
Measured it, and you can see just doesn't have a whole lot of range of motion. And what is the big limitation of this guy? Well, there's a couple. You know, it doesn't have 4K. That's actually an artificial constraint, in my opinion. DJI is just holding back just to make us want to buy other drones. But the speed, I mean, the speed is a huge issue, flight time as well. But the speed
both of those are probably going to be better on the Mavic Air. We know the flight time is 21 minutes. That's 5-6 minutes better than the Spark for sure. Yeah,
it's going to be faster, but I think more importantly, in its default normal flying mode, it's going to be much faster than the Spark. The Spark claims to be 30-something miles an hour. 31. And it can do that in sport mode. It's quick. But what about when you're trying to get nice video?
Yeah, it is super slow.
Super slow, super slow. They've slowed it way down so that it doesn't have to correct, roll, and pitch too much to keep the image stable. And that's all due to the limited range on this gimbal. And, you know, that's why I was pretty disappointed to see the images of the Mavic Air. But again, that's where the image stabilization comes in. So we think they're going to do something a little bit closer to what they've done, like on the Bebop, and they're going to crop that significantly. How much can you crop it? Well, 32 divided by 2 is 16, divided by 2 again is 8 megapixels, which, by the way, is what you get with 4K. So when you crop it by 2 in both directions, you can actually tilt the image quite a bit and stabilize, correct that. This is the 25-degree tilt with the Spark, and I can achieve that, but we can actually think they can do quite a bit more. So if you look at the specs for the Phantom 4 Pro in sport mode, it can tilt 42 degrees. I mean, that is insane. So you're flying the thing like this when you're changing directions, or flying really only when you're changing directions or fighting some serious wind probably. And in theory, with digital stabilization, you can maybe correct even up to 40 degrees or maybe even a little bit more with electronic stabilization and this 32 megapixel sensor. So really, that kind of changed my whole opinion of this drone when I started thinking about being able to fly fast and have a stabilized image.
Yeah. Hopefully that is what they decide to do. We'd love to see that.
The other thing, going back to some of these specs that's kind of interesting, is they talk about three-way obstacle avoidance. So the only other drone where they list the number of directions other than forward. So if you look at the Mavic, specs on the Mavic, they say forward obstacle avoidance. You look at the Spark, same thing. If you look at the Phantom 4 Pro, they say 5 directions. So they're including down.
Which we do have downward sensors on this, for sure. We get a camera and some other sensors on the bottom. So,
but they talk about 3 directions. So like the Autel Evo, which was just announced at CES, this guy, the Mavic Air, is going to have rear obstacle avoidance, which is going to be super handy, especially for some of those automatic flight modes. I imagine some of the people who bought the Spark did a little wave thing, and the drone probably flew right back into a tree.
Right.
Luckily, the arms on this thing super solid. This thing can handle a crash, unlike...
Not that we've crashed it, but...
No, we actually haven't, really.
No.
But, like all of our other drones. But, but this thing can actually take it, unlike probably your Mavic or your Phantom, which are just too big, too heavy, and the arms and the gimbals just aren't that solid. But anyway, this guy's going to be more about avoidance rather than durability, we think, the Mavic Air. So, kind of overnight, actually on the car ride home tonight, I was thinking about what they were going to do with these 32 megapixels. We talked it over, and my opinion of the Air went from pretty pessimistic to really optimistic. I think it's going to be really cool. I don't think DJI would release electronic image stabilization unless it was fully baked. With 32 megapixels, you got a ton of pixels to handle it. And what are they going to do? I mean, is it going to be a bigger sensor? Probably not. It's probably going to be 1/2.3 inches like the rest of the drones in their commercial lineup, except for the 4 Pro, which is 1 inch, much bigger. So it's going to be like that probably, but they're going to shrink the pixels so you can get more of them in there. You look at something like a GoPro, tiny, tiny pixels. But they're able to deal with that because you're flying out in daylight. So unless you're flying this thing at night, there's going to be plenty of light, and you don't really need the extra sensitivity you get with bigger pixels. So we think it's going to perform really well. Again, I don't think DJI would release something half-baked.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in. Check us out on our website, halfchrome.com, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.
See you next time. Should have some music playing here, like lead out music.
Right.
Need a boombox.